Thanks so much. All right, thanks, Mike. Thanks again to AFCEA and local chapter and everybody who's still here this time of day. I hope you found the session breakouts as fulfilling and interesting as I did, and I really appreciate my co-chairs in my room, Colonel Popiak, Sergeant Major Rogers, and a slew of wonderful volunteers and great brains, so thank you all for being there. We talked about attract and recruit from the standpoint primarily of the K-12 STEM, so not coming into the workforce yet, but really the younger ages. So in context with that, and it was a very, very good conversation with a lot of notes that will be available through AFCEA for use in any number of ways. So if you all want to see some of the details, please let AFCEA know. So the top three best practices that rose to the top of everything we talked about, the first one, really important, is the opportunity to stimulate the mind, inspire the imagination of our young people. Young people do well when they understand that there's actually a purpose or a point to their education, not just being talked to from a stage or from a lecture stand in a classroom. They really like the opportunity to participate. So it was clear there's a lot of passion and energy around the notion of cross-disciplinary learning opportunities, clubs and projects, and those include challenges like Future Cities Challenge. It includes cyber challenges, Cyber Patriot, hackathons even, although the notion was not just one-day events, but really going into, multi-week, multi-year type of learning opportunities. Robotics clubs, all of those kind of came into sort of a number one best practice that really stimulate and excite our young people. The second one is not far off of that, but really focused more at the school and community level. So school-based programs maybe being in the classroom, such as having educators, professionals from, a STEM world, military, anybody who's got this STEM knowledge to be able to come into the classroom and help those teachers. But school-based learning and programs is really important. The opportunity to have these programs after school, clubs, for the kids to do if it's not a sport that they're involved in. There's an after-school club that's focused on STEM or math or robotics or any number of topics. And then even in the community, not just school-based, but in the community at your local YMCA or your local religious facility, the ability to have the opportunity to have that experience. And then the third one, which is no less important than the first two, these are all equally critical to us, is the ability to have teachers that are developed, that have influence, that have support, that are empowered. So the best practice aspect of this you'll end up seeing on our challenge slide as well. But all of us have those best teachers that we remember, the people that inspired us, the people who were part of either a classroom-based learning, like a project-based learning environment, which is one of our best practices of project-based learning. Then there's also teachers that didn't inspire us. But for the most part, the ones that did are the ones that we think of as a best practice. My team, anything else that we left off of this opportunities or best practices? Good? Okay. Moving on to the challenges. So for every best practice, there are also challenges in making that best practice work, making it accessible to all schools and to all young people, and finding the funding for it. So these three really get at that. The first one being, okay, if we said that the best practice is great teachers, how do we get those teachers? How do we attract them into teaching in the first place? How do we give them the tools, teach them to be great speakers and inspiring speakers to their students, to give them the opportunity to be empowered to do what they need to do? Some of that requires the policies at both the education department level, but also at your local superintendent, school board level, and even within the school itself. Teachers feel very constrained to answer to the needs of the principal, to answer to what policies are coming down from superintendent and school board, and then, of course, Department of Education. But as we learned in our session, most of the decisions are made rather fairly locally. So there may be standards at a statewide level, but schools and school districts have the ability to then implement things in a way that works for them, but only if we're speaking up. So there's an area where you all can get involved if you either want to run for school board office, superintendent spot, or get involved in the policy-making aspects, and we mean that at all levels. So it's one thing to attract the teachers and empower them, but it's another to give them the freedom to operate and do the things that we admire about the best practice ones. The second one, funding and partnerships. We had a really great conversation about this. There are some great programs we talked about on the first slide. They all require funding. They all require partnerships with industry, with academia, with nonprofits, with the military. Everybody needs to come together to provide things like access for all students. We have great programs at some schools. I see this in Virginia all the time. We'll talk about some great program, but they're not available at the Title I school system, or the Title I schools, or at the schools that are just above Title I that don't qualify for Title I, but they also don't have the money in their neighborhoods. So there's no after-school math enrichment, no after-school STEM. And even then, when you can provide it, they don't have the transportation. The parents are trying to work. They can't get their kids there. So we're finding at the Thomas Jefferson Partnership Fund that I work with, a lot of our requests are actually for funding for buses. You know, it turns out that we can find funding for the programs, but getting the kids buses and even having food trucks come in to feed kids, I mean, believe it or not, you know, it's at that Maslow hierarchy level of just getting the kids the support they need. So the funding and partnerships can't be understated for how important that is to help solve the challenge of access for all. And then finally, creating continuity opportunities for K-12. What we mean by that is we, again, see great programs. Maybe it's a first Lego League in your school. Maybe it's a STEM camp for 1 week, for 1 summer. How do we create the continuity to bring all of that through their entire experience from K all the way to 12? Those are really big challenges for us, and obviously it involves funding, time, partnerships, expertise. But those are the things that we think are worthy of focusing on. And I love one of our audience member, or one of our participants in the workshop said, you know, instead of thinking of it as just funding, his comment was, we should think of this as investing. We're investing in the future of our country, in the future of our kids. So it's not just throwing some funds around, it's investing and being there for them. My group, anything else that I missed? Okay, it was wonderful working with you all, and thank you so much.
I want to also add that on Natalie's group, she had Sergeant Major Cammie Rogers was one of her chairs, and Lieutenant Colonel Elizabeth Popiak, I think I pronounced that correctly, was the other chair. And they had a lot of dialogue. Yesterday, one of the big issues at the CTF was getting the kids back so they could get on the bus to go home, because the teachers couldn't go 5 different directions when we went back. Okay, our second group is led by Lieutenant Colonel Spurl. His chairs are Lieutenant Colonel Jason Allen and Dr. Raquel Hill. Thank you very much, and come on down.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this workshop and in this symposium. I would also, before I begin, like to thank my co-chairs, Lieutenant Colonel Jason Allen, who's the Signal Enlisted Development College Director, Bill Newhouse, who many of you probably know better than I do, and the Deputy Director of NICE for NIST, and then Dr. Raquel Hill, who came to us from Spelman College as an Associate Professor and Chair. So we looked at the second set of the problem set, which is once we have people interested in this cybersecurity or STEM field, how do we train, educate, and develop them so that they continue to be a value-added part of our community and solving the problem set at hand? And we tried to do this through a more fast and furious version of the brainstorming session. So in addition to challenges and best practices, we also tried to answer the question, what would be some tools that would help us to introduce these best practices back at our respective organizations with industry, academia, and government service. So beginning with challenges, because we always like to remove the Band-Aid real quick, we find that effective marketing continues to be one of the problem sets that we face across the board. So we have a ton of different programs that have been developing over the last 10 to 15 years that help to educate us on cybersecurity fundamentals and build on what STEM we have built in the K through 12 area. But trying to match the education opportunities to the outcomes and the interests of our personnel coming in continues to be a challenge. And then you will probably see budget in each of the group's findings. At root, this is really a problem of scarcity in a labor market. So when you have a scarce labor market, what happens is everything that you want costs more. Salaries cost more because you want to recruit the best talent to your formations. This also means that finding the best education and finding the ways to develop yourself also costs money in your organization. And then finally, we looked at exposure across all demographics. So not all schools are created equally at the K through 12 level. Not all colleges are created equally. Not all organizations are created equally. So how do we identify the best type of training for an individual based off of what training and education they have had coming up from K through 12 that would allow us to tie the effective learning strategies to make them a benefit-added part of the workforce? If we could jump over to best practices. So in best practices, we looked at what I like to break it down to is learning styles. So a lot of people learn in different ways. So best practice is having a lot of different tools and learning possibilities, learning strategies to provide to students so that they can hook on to the ones that are able to best develop them for their future work roles. Second one is sponsorship and mentorship. So cybersecurity, even though it's been around for over a decade now, and some could argue 20, 30 years, it is still relatively new, and just the pace of technology is creating new variations in how we apply them. So if we can tie our personnel at entry level to somebody who has already paved some of the way on that, who can kind of mentor them through how best to educate themselves in their own self-structured development, that would help them to stay interested and continue to educate themselves. And then finally, we took a hack at what kind of tools would help us instantiate a good training and education environment. And we started with sandbox environments, which should come as no surprise to many in this room. We are trying to build sandboxes, virtual environments where people can actually get hands-on experience with the concepts that they are learning in the education environment. The second, again, a theme throughout the workshop is how do we best mentor and sponsor people, and any tools that can help them do so potentially helps them with outreach. And then the final one is, again, a trend in our workshop, which is trying to find multiple different types of tools that we can put towards each of our learning outcomes. The ones that routinely came up were things like YouTube and structured computer-based training, but that would also come with book learning and instructor-led or instructor-facilitated education. For those who were part of my work group, is there anything that I glaringly missed or should add to this outbrief? All right, thank you very much.
That was a busy group right from the start, and they had a plan, and they executed the plan. So you've had two, and we're going to look at the retained area. Captain Glenn Hernandez, U.S. Coast Guard, retired, is going to serves as the chair. He'll announce his co-chairs when he gets up here, but I think you're going to find this as interesting as the first two.
Thank you, Mike. All right, good afternoon, everyone. So thanks for the opportunity to listen to our group. So we were very privileged to have great facilitators with us. We have Colonel Janelle Nelson. She's over at SOCOM, but she's also the Navy civilian out in Nebraska. So thank you very much, Janelle. And then we also have the Deputy Dean of the College of Cyber at the National Cryptologic School, Diana Hornberger. So thank you very much for their participation. Also, thanks to AFCEA, the sponsors, the volunteers that we had, Horace, Jacob, and the Guptas, and also the chapter. Incredible support. We couldn't have gone through that session. We only had 90 minutes, right, to really come up with these thoughts. We had great engagement of every individual in our workshop, which was fantastic because we had slices of academia, industry, government, military, to really, how are we going to address the retain issue? And we heard throughout the last day and a half, in terms of topics on the panels and things that you see in the networking, how these topics really hamper our capability throughout the country as a national strategic asset to really operate and maintain, sustain these capabilities. And so the retention issue was really a complex problem that we started going into, but hopefully you'll get something take away. And so throughout the year, AFCEA has been very proactive in trying to address workforce issues. And so through the AFCEA Cyber Committee, I have a workforce subcommittee with AFCEA that looks after every cert. After the first cert, I'm retired Coast Guard. I have a bias for action, right? We want to make sure things are getting done. And so rather than talk about it at Cert 1, I said, what can I do to help AFCEA empower individuals? And so we started the AFCEA Workforce Subcommittee. And so we have DOD, DHS, NSA, DISA, industry, and academia really trying to help on everything that we learn from every successful certs and take that into action items throughout the year, like we heard for the call to action last year. And so we try to make sure we're keeping tabs on what we get from certs. And through these work groups, we're really trying to channel that into action items through the various channels that we have through AFCEA. So thank you very much, General Shea, for allowing us to do that. So I'm going to turn it over to Colonel Nelson, who's going to brief out our findings from the workshop.
Great, thank you. Next slide. So some of the best practices we had heard about in our work group for retaining people, career and talent management, and what that, by the flexibility by choice, is giving the employee a chance to put them where they want to be, keep them happy, because we've heard throughout the conference it's not always about the money, it's more about keeping people happy. We also had promotions, rewards, all those little perks that we sometimes overlook the importance of. We had the cyber-based skill assessment. We had one of our companies, it was Booz Allen, they are doing this within the company, and it's successful for them. So they're looking at where people's skills are, and they're trying to identify who to keep and where to put them and keep them happy. And then lastly, location can't be overlooked. People and their family, their children being in good schools, that means a lot to them. So if we can keep that in mind, that might be one of the things that keeps somebody with us instead of going over to another organization. Next slide. Some of the major problem areas, we've heard multiple times, people want to be part of the mission. They're motivated by the mission. And sometimes it's frustrating if all they're doing is training and exercising. So how do we get them out there participating in mission requirements? We have great tools that we hear about. We have Scholarship for Service, where we can send one of our employees off to get a master's degree, but who knows about it? Who's talking about it? We have the retention bonuses. Sometimes it's a fight with the J1 to get those bonuses into action. I know I work for an organization that just was told, no, you can't use them. Apprenticeships, internships, and co-ops, there's been a lot of success we had another, I think it might have been Booz Allen again on our committee, where they've been able to recruit students through internships and then use them. So maybe other organizations can do that, or leverage the small business that's doing that. And then finally, one of the main issues, and this came up last search too, is security clearances. And it's not just a recruiting problem, it's a retention problem, because at one time, a lot of us have a security clearance. Now we want to hire, but it's expired. So you have a pool of qualified candidates that, how do you keep that active? Or give us a shortcut to get them back. Anything else from Glenn? Yes. Go ahead.
We heard about the reserve problem with having to only stay a limited amount of time before they were required to move out. I think the gentleman's over here might be able to
And so one of the things that we found through the workshop, obviously, we're not going to address all the issues just on these 2 slides. And so I think the opportunity is that we captured all the comments, and we're going to ensure that AFCEA, sir, if you can make sure that we post it or make it available. And if you're curious as to what other items and recommendations and best practices were available that didn't, for whatever reason, make it up on this list, we'll make sure we make that available to you. I wanted to give Diana an opportunity to talk from an academic or institutional perspective regarding education.
So one of the things that came up in our workshop was the use of Interagency Personnel Act opportunities. So smart people want to work with smart people, and they want to learn from smart people. And one of the things that we're able to do is reach out to professors who are renowned in a specific field. So for reverse engineering, we can partner with Chris Inglis from NPS and bring him in to teach for a week to some high-level employees and do different things like that. We had another gentleman here from DDS that had to leave that also relies heavily on IPAs. So that's another opportunity that we can use to help retain people and keep them motivated, keep them in the field, and keep them fresh.
So I, again, thank you to the participants in Workshop 3 and the volunteers and, of course, the facilitators, co-chairs. Thank you very much. We have an opportunity, to really engage on this topic throughout the year. So if you're interested, please see me, contact me. You can find me on LinkedIn in regards to how we can move the conversation. If you recall from my presentation 3 years ago, it was really about what can we do through our partnership and nationally to move the ball in terms of actions. And so I'm really looking forward to outcomes and looking forward to next year at CERTS 21 on how we can continue to improve. And thank you for the opportunity, sir. Thank you very much.